Introduce yourself to everybody.
Well, as Keith mentioned, my name is Elder Larry Elder. Quick story: my father's last name is Elder, but that's not the last name of his biological father. My father never met his biological father. His mother was illiterate, irresponsible. She had a series of boyfriends, each one more irresponsible than the other one. Elder was just the man who was in my dad's life the longest, and my dad began using his last name. I don't think Elder even formally adopted my dad. So now my dad's 13 years old. He comes home. Begins quarreling with his mom's then boyfriend. She sides with the boyfriend and throws my father out of the house, never to return. Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South at the beginning of the Great Depression. My dad said he walked down the road, picked up trash. Ultimately, he became a Pullman porter on the trains. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days. And my dad went to this place called California, a city called Los Angeles. And he was blown away, Keith. You could walk in the front door of a restaurant and get served. My dad always had packages of crackers and tin cans of tuna because he never knew in the South if you'd be able to get a meal. My dad sort of made a mental note, maybe someday I'll relocate to California. Pearl Harbor, my dad joined the Marines. I asked him why. He said 2 reasons. They go where the action is. I love the uniforms. So my dad was stationed on Guam. He was in charge of cooking for the colored soldiers. My dad can look at a cake and tell you what's in it. He's that good. He gets out, he goes back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he met and married my mom to get him a job as a cook. And he's told, we don't hire niggers. My dad went to an unemployment office. The lady says, you went to the wrong door. My dad goes to outside the hall and sees colored only, goes to that door to the very same lady who sent him out. My dad came home to my mom and said, this is BS. I'm going to LA where I was before the war, getting a job as a cook. He comes out to LA, he walks around, and he's told, you don't have any references. My dad said, any references to make ham and eggs? And he offered to work for free for a reference that wouldn't do that. Goes to the unemployment office, this time just one door. A lady says, I have nothing. My dad says, what time do you open? She says, 9. What time do you close? She says, 5. My dad said, I'll be sitting in that chair till you find something. My dad sat in that chair for a day and a half. She calls him up. I have something. I don't know whether you're going to want it. My dad said, of course I'm going to want it. I'm starting a family. What is it? It's a job cleaning toilets and Nabisco brand bread. My dad did that for over 10 years, took a second full-time job cleaning toilets at another bread company, cooked for a family on the weekend because he wanted my mom to be a stay-at-home mom. Went to night school to get his GED. After that, he goes to night school to learn how to operate a small restaurant. Age of 47, saves nickels and dimes, starts a small restaurant, runs it until his 80s when my dad retired. He owned the restaurant, property next door, plus a little home that's still in our family. Not too shabby for an 8th grade dropout. And my dad was a lifelong Republican. My mom was a lifelong Democrat. You should have been a fly on the wall, Keith. My dad said this about Democrats. Democrats want to give you something for nothing. When you try and get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something. And he always told my brothers and me the following: hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. Larry, you cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you moan or groan about what somebody did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it, and say to yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, my dad told my brothers and me the following: no matter how hard you work, how good you are, sooner or later, bad things will happen. How you deal with those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man. That's what I'm all about. My dad would not tolerate this notion about America being systemically racist. Racism has never been a less important factor in American life than today. Democrats push it and push it and push it. Not only does it divide America, not only does it push nonsense like reparations, it's getting people killed. It's called the Ferguson effect or the George Floyd effect. That's a phenomenon of cops all over America pulling back for fear of being accused of engaging in systemic racism. So now there are thousands of Americans who have been victimized by violent crime, some dead because the police have not been doing their normal proactive policing because of this lie. My father would not tolerate this, and that's what I'm all about. This has never been a better country, a country where you have more opportunity. It's about leadership, and that's why I'm running.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to have my lovely wife, Sarah, help me. Did you pick up the little mic over there, Sarah? Yeah, can you bring it on up here just so we want people to be able to hear you loud and clear, not just through the microphone, but we also want people at home if they have it. So, can you hand me that, please? Thank you very much. Would you be able to clip this onto your lapel right there? Yeah, anywhere works, whatever makes you most comfortable. All right. One of of the things that, the reason I started off the question in the way I did, which is by bringing up something offensive that people have said about you before that is not accurate, is because I've heard your story that you just told. And why do you think people see you as so much of a threat that they need to make up lies about you? That they need to say offensive things about you? That they need to act like you're someone you're not? Because like I said, I've been listening to you for years. I'm sure other people here have listened to you over and over again. You've had great things to say for a long time. And I can't find anything about your message that you've been preaching for a long time to people that should have the kind of vitriol that would include people lying about you. Why do you think people feel the need to lie about you?
I think I give Democrats and people on the left heartburn because I tell the truth. I tell the truth bluntly, and I tell it honestly, and I think that they don't want to hear it. I'll give you an example. Joe Biden goes to Howard University, a historically black college, and gives a commencement exercise. He tells all these young black people the number one threat to the homeland is white supremacy. Biden said that. Are you smoking something? The Anti-Defamation League keeps track of how many extremists kill people every year. Last year, 25 people were killed by extremists. And a few days ago, a racist white man in Jacksonville, Florida, murdered 3 black people and did so because they were black. And of course, Biden said something about it, which is fine. He issued a statement. And he said, Biden did, that hatred like this has to be called out. And if you don't call it out, you are complicit. About 2 or 3 months earlier, if you have never heard this, this is what I mean. About 2 or 3 months ago, a black man gets a gun, walks up to a white man in Tulsa, Oklahoma, pulls out the gun, shoots him in the back of the head and kills him. Goes to another part of Tulsa, sees another white man he doesn't know, pulls out the gun, shoots him in the back of the head, and kills him, execution style. And admits he did it because they were white. Biden said nothing. Now, if you want to play this game, most homicide in America is same-race homicide. Most whites who are killed by other whites. Most blacks who are killed by other blacks. Roughly 20,000 plus homicides every year. But a small percentage of them are, in fact, interracial homicides. Black, white, black. Roughly 750 a year. 500 white people are killed by blacks, and 250 blacks are killed by whites, even though blacks are 13% of the population, and whites are 60%. So at 13% of the population, blacks are killing twice as many whites as the other way around. If Donald Trump said at a commencement exercise, the number one threat to the homeland is black supremacy, you and I, Keith, would call him a race-hustling demagogue trying to divide America. Biden says the same thing about white supremacy, and the RNC and Republican leadership doesn't say a darn thing. That's why I make them feel uncomfortable. Number 2, the number one issue in this country, social issue, not economics. We're talking about inflation and gas prices and borders, all this we know. The number one social issue in America is the epidemic of fatherlessness. Today, 70% of black kids, it is particularly acute in the black community, 70% of black kids enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother. And the stats are clear. Even Obama once quoted them until Jesse Jackson told him he was talking down to black people. If you were raised without a dad, you were 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What we've done in the mid-60s, Lyndon Johnson did, I think with the best of intentions, launched a so-called war on poverty. And since then, we have incentivized women to marry the government, and we've incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And it is not to denigrate the hard job that single moms have done, often with the help of the extended family, but it is much, much more difficult. Now, I made this argument, Keith, and I'll shut up, to Charlemagne the God. That's the guy to whom Joe Biden said, you ain't really black if you don't know whether you want to vote for me or vote for Trump. And I told him what I told you about fatherlessness. And they pushed back. I said, all right. According to the Center for Disease Control, a young black man, aged 10 to 43, is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man, same demo. The number one cause of preventable death for a white male 19 years and younger is accidents, like car accidents, drownings, drug overdoses. The number one cause of preventable death for a black man 19 years and younger is homicide, almost always killed by another young black man 19 and under. Blacks account for 60% of the homicides, the shootings, and the robberies in this country. I said to him, unless you're prepared to say black people are just genetically inclined to commit more crime, if it isn't fatherlessness, please tell me what it is. He had nothing to say. This is the kind of stuff that I think makes them feel uncomfortable. It's the truth. No one's talking about it. The left doesn't talk about fatherlessness because they caused it. Our side doesn't talk about it because if you're white, the fear is you'll be called racist or you'll be accused of not understanding the culture. And if you're black, you'll be called the black face of white supremacy. The fact is, if we don't begin talking about this stuff, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And Malcolm X said, I'm for the truth no matter who's telling it. Tell the truth. That's what I try and do.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, you mind if we ask you some policy issues then? Because I think everybody's on board with you on everything you just said. So let's see if we can stir up some controversy. No. So first and foremost, I've noticed that there are a lot of people who are running for president, and eventually I'll let you in on what I'm going to ask later about why in the world they wouldn't let you on that stage. I will get to that because I was pretty annoyed, and I know several of the people in this crowd were annoyed to not see you up there. But we'll get to that. First, when we're getting toward that, I want to ask, what in the world is it going to take to get politicians to actually start addressing these issues that you're bringing up in your campaign? And if you want to, you can then transition that into, why wouldn't they let you on the stage to address it?
The Republican Party positions itself as a party of fiscal responsibility. And compared to Democrats, it is. But that's a low bar. We're right now about ready to face a government shutdown. A little while ago, we had a controversy over whether or not the debt ceiling should be increased. Government gets bigger and bigger and bigger, no matter whether Republicans are in charge or Democrats are in charge. In 1900, at all three levels, believe it or not, government took 9% from the American people, federal, state, local. Now it's 32%. The word unsustainable was used to describe the so-called entitlements programs by Bill Clinton and by Barack Obama, but nothing ever gets done because if you run promising to reform any of them, the other side will accuse you of not caring about the sick, the poor, the elderly, so the can gets kicked down the road. We are borrowing $5 billion a day. And now the borrowing is more expensive because of the lowering of the debt rating, so now it costs more money to borrow that $5,000 a day. Nothing gets done because the first job of most politicians is to get elected, and the second job is to get reelected. And you don't get elected promising you're going to take things away from people. The only way for politicians to truly make the kinds of structural root canal kind of reforms they need to make and the deep spending cuts is with an amendment to the Constitution to set spending to a fixed percentage of the GDP and put them in a room, lock a door, make them make the kind of changes, and then they can come to the voters and say, look, the law made me do these things, please don't hurt me. Otherwise, nothing will get done. And these programs will not be there for children and for grandchildren unless there's structural reform. They won't make the reforms unless they're forced to make it by law. And I feel that Republicans have been a wimp on this issue. They want to take a pocket knife to a problem that requires a machete. And the idea of an amendment is not pie in the sky. Since the Constitution was ratified, it's been amended on an average of 10 years ever since. It takes a president to use the bully pulpit to explain to the American people why this is necessary and explain to young people why these things have to be done in order to make sure these programs are there for you. So that's one of the many things that I talk about on the campaign trail. As for what happened to me in Milwaukee, thank you for asking. I met all the debate criteria. I needed to have 40,000 individual donors, check. 200 had to come from 20 different states, check. I had to submit 3 polls where I was at 1% or more in the polling, check, check, check. Phone call from Ronna McDaniel. Larry, you are not qualified for the debate because one of the polls you submitted can't be used. It's the Rasmussen poll. It can't be used because it's affiliated with Trump. To which I said, assuming that's true, why is that my problem? And she said, well, any poll affiliated with any candidate cannot be used by any other candidate. By the way, Rasmussen put out a statement after this and said, Trump is not affiliated with our poll. There's no reason why Elder can't use our poll. So then we submitted a 4th poll where I was at 1% or better. And Ronna McDaniel said, you submitted it too late. And that's true. However, that polling organization conducted their polling before the deadline, so there was enough wiggle room that they could have put me up there if they wanted to. Not only, Keith, was I now allowed to debate, I was not allowed to enter the venue. They put up a sign at the door and said, if Elder shows up or if his campaign shows up, don't let him in the building. So now I'm on the RNC terror watch list. My lawyer is the former chair of the Federal Elections Commission. And he says there's a regulation done by the FEC that requires them, once you set your debate criteria, to fairly apply it to everybody. And if you don't, you could subject yourself to a fine. The fine could be as high as $100 million. And so on the day of the debate, I gave them until 2 o'clock to change their mind. They did not. And so now we filed a complaint with the FEC. But that'll take years to work through. In the meantime, in order for me to make that next debate on the 27th of this month in California, I have to have 3 polls where I'm at 3% or better, and 50,000 individual donors up from 40,000. As for the 50,000, we're not worried. As for the 3%, that's a different deal. Given the fact that I wasn't there in Milwaukee to say the kinds of stuff I'm saying to you, it's much, much harder for me to make my case. We have launched a $500,000 ad buy a few days ago in hopes to get my numbers up. And I'm having interviews, print, radio, TV, all the time in order to hopefully make that debate. And if I do make that debate, it'll be the biggest comeback since George Foreman. Thank you for getting the reference. I said it to a young reporter. He goes, is that the guy that got the cooking girls?
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. All right, so yeah, I think that I would like to see that come back. I think it says a lot that you're the only one. We got a lot of maybes, and we have some great people here from campaigns. We got a lot of maybes from campaigns. Your campaign is the only one that agreed to come to the smallest county in Iowa. Like that says a lot to me. I mean, and also I love it here. So, but I think that says a lot. So now on to something controversial, because I got to be there to watch Tucker Carlson kind of probably shipwreck a couple other people's campaigns in Iowa a few months back. A couple other people were around there too for that. He asked questions about Ukraine, and I want to frame it like this though. $80 billion is a lot of money. A lot of money. In fact, in a hypothetical situation where every state in the union has 100 counties in it, that would be hypothetically $16 million for every county in the United States, and there aren't that many counties. Why do we keep shipping money to Ukraine when every time we hit a pothole, we should be reminded that we shipped that money overseas to kill Russians? Why is this something that the political elite have said that is worth the treasure from our taxpayers?
Somewhat of a long answer. There are 2 things whenever I get this question that I think either is not brought up often enough or is not brought up at all. And the first is this. You and I, Keith, would not be having this conversation if Joe Biden hadn't pulled out of Afghanistan the way he did. He did it without informing our allies. He left $7 billion in cutting-edge military equipment there. He left hundreds of Americans and Afghan sympathizers. It sent a signal to our enemies and our friends that we cannot be trusted, and perhaps even worse than even the 13 servicemen and women who were killed. He flat out lied and said nobody advised him that the Taliban would take over and the Afghan government would collapse in a matter of days. 2 of our highest level generals testified under oath. They told him exactly that. So not only did he lie, he threw the military under the bus. And this is probably the most disgusting part of this whole thing. The other thing that almost nobody brings up is something called the Budapest Memorandum. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine was the 3rd largest possessor of nuclear weapons in the world. They signed something called the Budapest Memoranda. Actually, it was 3 memoranda, but it was called the Budapest Memorandum, signed by us, the UK, and Russia, in order for them to surrender their nukes, which they did, with an assurance that in the event that their national security was threatened, that they would get security assurances. So, to completely ignore that they signed this and turned over their nukes is to send a message to other nuclear-armed countries like North Korea. You give up your nukes, and this could happen to you. It also is encouraging other countries like Iran to get nukes, because once you get them, you're treated differently. So those are two things I think we ought to mention whenever we talk about Ukraine. That said, I remember when this incursion, this invasion started. It had already gone into Ukraine in 2014, but this is even deeper, obviously. And I'm watching Fox News, and all these experts, military experts, are saying this is going to be a matter of days, weeks. Ukraine can't possibly survive. They're going to collapse. This is now deep into the second year. Putin has already lost this war. He's lost, by one estimate, something like 200,000 troops, which if you put it in American terms, it's as if we've lost 400,000 troops. They've lost about 20 or 30 generals on the battlefield, or they disappeared. Their economy is in free fall. There was an attempted coup, for crying out loud. And because of this, now Finland has joined NATO, and Sweden is about ready to join NATO. Putin did not anticipate any of all of this. He has already lost this war. It now looks to me like it's in a stalemate, and we should put pressure on both sides to solve this thing. $100 million, which is what soon we're going to be spending, will have spent, is a great deal of money. Both sides, it seems to me, have a vested interest in ending this thing, and I think that we should put pressure on both sides to do so. I don't believe that Donald Trump can solve this in 48 hours, which is what he said, but I do believe that putting pressure on both sides can end this thing. That's what we ought to do.
All right, and after this next question, if you have questions for Mr. Elder, I think that would be wonderful. I think that take advantage of this. So my final question to you is more about the domestic policy side of things. We've talked foreign policy, we've talked fatherlessness in America. There's a lot of people who are, I would say, a lot of people, we'll say 50 and under, who are looking at their future and saying, it doesn't look as bright as it did for my parents. Now, that may or may not be true in certain ways, but we know that the economy with inflation has absolutely wrecked some households. That a lot of people that you talk to, they don't plan on being able to retire. What does an elder presidency say to those people? What future should young Americans look to so that it can actually be bright and they can have hope again?
An elder presidency says help is on the way. Dramatically cut spending. Dramatically lower taxes, dramatically lower regulations. Get the country back on sound fiscal footing. By the way, the largest landowner in America is the federal government. We have plenty of assets. We have Tennessee Valley Authority. We have dams. We have bridges. These could be sold or leased to the private sector, get our debt and deficit down to we're back on the kind of footing that the founding fathers intended. Milton Friedman said there are 4 ways of spending money, from the most productive, most efficient, most effective, to the least productive, least efficient, least effective. Your money on yourself is the most efficient way of spending money. The more money you leave in the pockets of the American people, the more efficiently the money will be spent. The next most efficient money being spent is when you spend your money on somebody you love and care about, like your family. Next is if you're on an expense account, your boss spending money on you, you can't go crazy, otherwise you get fired. The least productive, least effective way of spending money is somebody else's money on somebody else. And much of our budget is somebody else's money being spent on somebody else. All that changes under a Larry Elder presidency. It was a time when we used to have 5, 6, 7% GDP. Our wealth doubled every 10 years. Now if we do 2.5%, 3%, we give ourselves high fives. That's because so much money is being spent by government in so many inefficient ways. I'm going to put back more money in the pockets of the American people, let them determine how they want to spend the money, and invest the money, and save the money, and donate the money.
Thank you. All right. For the record, those of you who know me, I didn't try to tee him up for a land reform thing, but several of you know that speaks to my heart. So, all right. Well, with that, thank you for answering my questions. Does anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask of Mr. Larry Elder as he's here? Oh, come on. Judge, we'll start with you.
Larry, our country's always stood on the proposition there it's a level playing field. Right now, the Department of Justice and even the federal courts have become politicized so bad that I don't think we can think that way anymore. And I'd like to hear your ideas on how we can cure that.
Well, first of all, it's not about a level playing field, a level opportunity field. In your own household, I'm sure you have siblings. I would bet you that your siblings and you have different levels of income, different levels of education. So there isn't equality of outcome within the same family. How in the world are we going to have it in a whole country? The idea is for equal opportunity. And in my opinion, we have never had a better situation where there's been equal opportunity. This wokeism makes things worse. The idea that we should have race-based admissions, race-based hiring, all this stuff is the very opposite of what Martin Luther King wanted, which was a color-blind society, not a color-coordinated society. All these kinds of things are under assault by the left. And we need to stand up to them, call them out for what they are, and make sure the 14th Amendment, which only guarantees equal opportunity, equal protection, is what this country is all about. Country has never said everybody has the same choices. They don't. The outcome's not going to be the same. It is not. Life has always been unfair. The question is, can you escape poverty? And the answer is yes, you can. In order to escape poverty, you need to do 3 or 4 things. And by the way, a left-wing think tank called the Brookings Institution said this. I always quote liberals whenever I can because then you can't get attacked. Step number 1, finish high school, which is why we've got to have school choice. Because many of these kids, when they do graduate, cannot read, write, and compute at grade level. There's something called the National Report Card, the National Assessment of Educational Policy. 85% of black 8th graders, I'm not making this up, can neither read nor do math at grade level. Half can't do basic reading, which means a substantial percentage of 13-year-old black kids in America are functionally illiterate. How in the world are you going to have outcomes, opportunity, when you can't even read and critically think? That's why we've got to have school choice. There are 13 public high schools in Baltimore where 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. Another 1% where only 1%, another 1% where only 6 can. So half of the high schools in Baltimore, either 1% or 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. They're all located in the inner city. So we've got to have school choice. Number 2, don't have a kid until you're 20 years old. Number 3, get married before you have that kid. Next, get a job, keep a job, don't quit the job until you get another job, and avoid the criminal justice system. If you do those things, you will not be poor. And this is what we ought to be telling the American people, as opposed to telling kids and women and gays that you're victims, you're oppressed, you are part of the grievance class. We need to change rules and values in order to accommodate you. That's the opposite of what we ought to be telling people.
Can I follow that up?
Oh, yeah. You can probably keep that for now.
Yes, sir.
They're
I
not here.
appreciate your comments. But what I was thinking about was like what's happened in Virginia, where the FBI spied on the Catholic Church as adverse citizens.
Right.
In Virginia, where people that go to the school board meeting with grave concern are then targeted by the FBI and the
Right.
Department of Justice. Do you see a way that we can roll all this back and get back to where there's a Department of Justice
Right.
is the Department of Justice?
Yeah, I do see a way of doing that. Heads have to roll. You have to fire a lot of people. One of the things that Donald Trump did too late in his administration was to sign an executive order making it easier to fire civil service employees, the so-called deep state. And there is a deep state. A lot of people need to be fired. This is a two-tiered system of justice which ought to appall everybody. Not just what you said about school board, but all these indictments against Donald Trump. Let's just talk about the January 6th one. Donald Trump lawyers made the very same argument about the VP having more than ceremonial powers that Democrats made in 2000 after Bush v. Gore, when on the first week of January 2001, they challenged Florida. About a dozen Democrats did. Fast forward 2004, W gets reelected, won Ohio with 118,000 votes. 30 House Democrats, the first week of January 2005, challenged Ohio and said the Debo voting machines had been altered. Where have we heard that? Fast forward 2016. More Democrats challenged more states, 9, first week of January in 27, than Trump did the first week of January in 2021. Nobody accused them of being election deniers. Nobody prosecuted them, and their lawyers were not facing disbarment. Now, I don't care how much you hate Donald Trump's guts. If you can't see where this is going and how this is attacking the foundation of our republic, you are blind.
All right, who's next? Nathan, did you have something?
Hey, Nathan.
Yeah, say it into the mic.
So I think it's pretty apparent that you won the governor race against Gavin Newsom. So I don't know if you believe that or not, but do you believe that there are real election integrity issues within this country? And if you do believe that, what can we do to fix them?
On your first point about you think I won the election in California, a number of people, by the way, were angry at me when I conceded. California has not elected a Republican statewide in over 20 years. In California, I believe that Mother Teresa, John the Baptist, and Moses could run as Republicans and they would lose. So I don't believe that the election was without flaws, but they need to cheat when the election is close, not when it's one-sided like California. Your second part, do I believe that there are election integrity issues? You think? They use COVID in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin as an excuse to alter rules and regulations to benefit Democrats. And when people say that Donald Trump's lawsuits were without merit, let me just use those three states. Two left-wing prominent professors, Jonathan Turley and Alan Dershowitz, both are Democrats. Neither would vote for Donald Trump if he paid them. They both thought that the authorities used COVID to change rules and regulations so much in Pennsylvania that they predicted, Dershowitz did, that Trump's lawsuit would A, be taken up by the Supreme Court, and B, that Trump would win. He was wrong, but this is not some sort of left-wing kook who said this. Wisconsin, the lawsuit lost 4-3. The Wisconsin Supreme Court Chief Justice filed a dissent, and she said all these unsecured drop boxes all over the state were illegal, unlawful. And going forward, by the way, Wisconsin is no longer going to use these unsecured drop boxes. So he almost won that lawsuit, lost it 4-3. Michigan, he lost that one 2-1. The Michigan Supreme Court did not take it up, leaving the lower court ruling 2-1 in place. The Secretary of State in Michigan used COVID as an excuse to send mail-in ballot applications to every voter, whether they requested one or not. And a dissent was filed and said this was unlawful. So Donald Trump almost won the lawsuits in those three states. I want to remind people that Hillary Clinton advised Joe Biden during the 2020 election, quote, not to concede under any circumstances if it's a close election, close quote. Well, it was a very close election. About 40,000 votes in three states would have swung this in favor of Donald Trump. So Donald Trump fights, and he's considered to be an election denier when all he did was follow the same advice Hillary gave Joe Biden. The argument that Trump made on January 6th is that the vice president had more than ceremonial powers. It is the same argument, as I said, that was made by Democrats in 2000, Democrats in 2004, Democrats in 2016. This whole 2.5-year collusion nonsense, I'm trying to use a polite word, incredibly unfair, no evidence. There is so much evidence on Joe Biden's corruption. 10% for the big guy. On the laptop, Hunter's complaining about having to pay him half of his expenses. 20 or 30 shell corporations. Bunch of meetings where Joe Biden is with Hunter Biden's associates. The man, Joe Biden, did everything but leave his business card at the crime scene. And they impeached Donald Trump for virtually nothing. The laptop. 51 former intelligence officials signed this letter claiming the laptop had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Trump's director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, before that letter came out, publicly said there's no evidence at all that this laptop is Russian disinformation. Yet 51 people, including several former CIA directors, signed this letter. And there was a study done that looked at 7 or 8 swing states. And enough Biden voters say had they known about the laptop story, which was suppressed by Twitter and by Facebook, they would not have voted for Joe Biden. So for all these reasons, the election was one of unfairness. It was rigged. I've not used the word stolen, but it was incredibly unfair, and this is why so many people are angry. And by the way, Jay Johnson, Obama's DHS secretary, testified under oath about 2016. The Russians tried, but they failed to change a single vote tally, not one. YouGov poll, 66% of Democrats believe the Russians, quote, changed vote tallies, close quote, to elect Donald Trump. He also testified, there's no way of knowing how the Russian interference altered public opinion. And there was Russian interference. Most of it, by the way, was 5,000 or so Facebook ads taken out. Some were anti-Trump, some were pro-Trump, some anti-Hillary, some pro-Hillary, had virtually no effect. And there's a big study done by NYU and said all the Russian interference, the effect was so small as to be barely measurable. That's how they phrased it. He testified under oath. He has no idea whether or not the Russian interference altered the outcome of the election. He said, I'd have to have a country aware that was interference when there wasn't, and compare the two. I can't do that. I don't know. I have no idea. 78% of Democrats, according to Gallup, believe the Russian interference, quote, altered the outcome of the election, close quote. My long way of saying a greater percentage of Democrats believe 2016 was stolen than we feel that way about 2020. Nobody calls them election deniers. Nobody accuses them of pushing the big lie. Hillary, for Trump's entire presidency, referred to him as illegitimate and said the election had been stolen. No evidence of it all, whatsoever. And this kind of double standard, hypocrisy, and selective outrage, we've allowed it to go. And one of the things I said when I wasn't on that debate, one of the candidates, I believe it was Chris Christie, referred to Donald Trump as an insurrectionist. Again, no matter how much you hate the man, can we at least agree that the election of 2020 was riddled with unfairness, and there is a double standard regarding the way he handled January 6th versus the way the Democrats handled the same time in 2000, 2004, and 2016. We should at least be able to agree on that. Now, to deal with the election interference, we need to get back to single-day voting in person with ID, and if you are disabled or out of the country, then and only then can you vote absentee ballot. That's the only way to deal with this. By the way, they do not allow absentee balloting in Europe. The last country stopped doing it because it's the easiest way to commit fraud. But we're doing it here, where you can show up without even a ballot, fill out a mail-in application. It's absolutely outrageous, and we need to get back to single-day voting. Somehow, some way, when I was growing up, my parents found a way of voting on the day of the election. Our country survived. We can get back to that.
Thank you. Real quick, some candidates have brought up the idea of on single-day voting, making election day a holiday. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm fine with that.
You're fine with that? All right, cool. Sorry, that could be a short question.
Yeah. But if we don't, we should still be able to vote. It wasn't a holiday before, somehow we managed to do it. But I'm fine. That gives them no excuse now.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Greg, do you want to come up here and ask, or do you want to ask for that?
Oh, I think I yell loud enough.
You don't need to hear.
Thank you for being here. We really appreciate you being here in the smallest county in the state. I didn't know it was a small county. But
Just by land area, not in our hearts.
It's so tiny, the whole county could be carpeted.
you talked about the government finances, and we spend too much money, whether it's Republicans or Democrats in control. Totally agree with you on that. We need to cut the spending. How would you do that as president, though? Because the Congress has the purse strings, and do you have to find some way to bring them along?
Well, that's why I say the only way to do it. I can't put the 435 members of the House and the 100 members of the Senate and make this argument and expect them to do anything because they want to get reelected. George W. Bush, for a short period of time, had a proposal to allow workers to spend part of their Social Security on retirement accounts. Nancy Pelosi blasted him, accused him of trying to privatize Social Security, and his fellow Republicans did what they often do. They underwent their favorite exercise, which is running for the hills. The only way to do this is with a law that forces them to, and you cannot run for re-election until you do that. Then and only then will they pull out the balance sheet and look at all the assets America has, the land we all owned, the resources we all have, Tennessee Valley Authority, Hoover Dam, bridges that could be leased or sold, reduce the spending, and to do the kinds of reforms for things like Social Security that needs to be done. Bill Clinton put up a commission on reforming Social Security, and the recommendations were either extend the time at which you're eligible, or increase your contribution, or get a higher rate of return by investing in the stock market. They did nothing, but they know what to do. The only thing that's stopping them from doing it is the fear that they will not get reelected. But if they have to do it by law, they won't have any choice.
We only have a few more minutes. Are there any
It's
other,
amazing how creative you can get when a gun is to your head. Yeah.
Are there any other pertinent questions in the last few minutes here? Yes, Steve.
Once again, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure,
We
Steve.
know who we are, and we know where we stand, and we're honored that you're here. Your initial comments resonate with me in terms of the issues and some of the significant things that our society faces. How gives me two things that you can do from a presidential perspective that can impact that. It seems that the culture, and we have incentivized that, but now our feet are stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we get the genie back in the bottle?
On the epidemic of fatherlessness, government cannot solve this. Government created the crisis. What I can do from my perch as the president, the bully pulpit, is to encourage men of my generation, the baby boomer generation, to get involved. I liken it to Alcoholics Anonymous, where every recovering alcoholic has a sponsor, someone that you can pick up the phone, go visit, give you guidance and counseling when you feel a moment of weakness. Every one of these kids raised without a dad, these boys and girls, needs to have a male father figure in his or her life. And I'm urging all the people of my generation, many of us are still vigorous, still fit, they've raised children, they've nurtured grandchildren, they need to step up and volunteer as a mentor. The other thing is we're spending a lot of money in Washington, D.C. and various state capitals on programs that are just not effective. Meanwhile, we have churches, like my church is the Calvary Chapel Church of Chino Hills, my pastor, Jack Hibbs. We have a program where we go door to door offering mentorships, including places like Harlem. You can direct your tax dollars that are going for programs in Washington, D.C. that are not working for programs, organizations, and churches and houses of worship in your own neighborhood to do these kinds of things. Those are two things I can do. Encourage people to step up, become mentors, or to give resources, and encourage Congress to have a law that allows me to check off on my taxes where I want this money to go. There's a program in LA called Bond, Brothers of a New Destiny. A pastor named Jesse Lee Peterson runs that, and he counsels men who've grown up without fathers. There are all sorts of programs like that all over the country. Many of them are in our own neighborhoods that are doing this kind of work. They lack resources, they lack hands. And I'm going to urge Americans to step up.
All right. Is there one last question for Mr. Elder before we let him get on his way?
What federal departments would you get rid of? And what departments would you move throughout the country to get the power out of
Shorter conversation to say which ones would I save. I mean, there's so many I would get rid of, starting with the Department of Education. Done. Commerce, done. Labor, done. So many. Government is at least 75%, 80% too big. The fifth president, James Monroe, cast one veto in his presidency. And it was a veto against a bill that Congress signed to allow the expansion of the Cumberland Road. Even though it would go through Virginia, which is his home state, even though it would benefit his home state economically, he said there's no authority in the Constitution to tax money from state A for a project in state B. Now, we just do that without even thinking about it. When we don't like it, we call it pork. When we like it, we call it investments. None of this stuff should happen. Government should be way smaller. I would take, again, a machete to a problem that most Republicans are using a pocket knife on. There are so many programs, so many departments, interior, energy, that I would just eliminate. The question is, how many would I still leave standing? Maybe defense, maybe Secretary of State, few others, that's about it. A whole lot of people would not be working for the federal government if I were in charge.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Audubon, Iowa welcomes you, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime. Can we get one more big round of applause for Larry Elder? Thank you again. It's an honor. It really is. Have a good one. All right, everybody, there is food to be eaten. What?
Keep up the good fight.
Keep up the good fight, they say. There is food to be eaten, there are donations to be given. There are handshakes to be made. Make sure you get them done because we have got to start cleaning up soon. So talk to your representatives. Make sure you thank Mr. Elder for being here. Eat some food and have a wonderful time. Thank you, Audubon, and thank you on behalf of the Audubon County Republicans. Have a wonderful day, everybody.